Hello and welcome to game 127 from CCC 10's qualification phase. This one is against Laser and we have a French defense on the board, where after knight c3 and d takes on e4 we reach the end of the book. And in this position now, after knight takes on e4, Laser goes for knight d7. And we have a Rubinstein variation on the board. Black tries to avoid knight f6 here, which is not so great for him, because after knight takes and queen takes and knight f3, bishop g5 here is a threat harassing the queen. So black tries to avoid this variation, plays knight d7 first, and now after knight f3 and knight f6, if the knight takes, the other knight can recapture and black is fine. And here the main move for white is c3 or bishop d3, but other moves have been tried. Bishop g5 is definitely good, and also g3 or even the slightly less active bishop e3 works. So in this game we have c3, and black's main option here is bishop e7, since this bishop, white's dark squared bishop, will probably come to g5, where it pins this knight and is the most active square for that bishop. So in anticipation of that, black usually plays here bishop e7, but c5, going for fireworks, is also playable. And here in this game we have bishop d6, which doesn't break this pin, but has influence over the e5 square where this knight wants to go to, so it has some merits, this move, and is definitely liked by engines, even though at GM level it's not played so much. So after bishop d6, Leela continued with bishop d3, and now after castles we have bishop g5, and let's see how Laser copes with this annoying pin. First, he played b6 to allow this bishop to get to this nice diagonal. Of course, it's very unlikely that black will get in e5 anytime soon, especially that white has queen e2, adding even more control over e5. And without e5, this bishop is hard to activate this way, so it stays much better on b7. The game now continued with queen e2, and now we have h6, trying to solve the problem with the pin. And of course, Laser is hoping here for bishop takes on f6, when after queen takes on f6, black is doing very nicely. But of course white doesn't need to take on f6, is not forced to take. White can play bishop h4, maintaining this annoying pin. And it's very hard to solve this. You can just lash out here with g5, because then after bishop g3 white has this option to play h4 immediately and open the h-file. White didn't castle short yet, the rook is in a very nice file here, and if after h4 he can open the h-file, black is in trouble. Or if after h4 black tries to keep it closed with g4, then knight e5 with the idea to play f3 and then take on g4, and lines will be open and the black king will be in trouble. So this is not a good idea, g5. But in this game, Leela didn't play bishop h4 actually. She played h4, which is arguably an even better move. Quite simply, why remove this bishop from g5 if you don't have to? The point is that this pawn can take here, because now after h takes on g5, Leela is very likely to win back the piece, since moving this knight away and try to keep the material backfires after bishop h7. And the king has to go to h8, and now queen e4 is very, very strong, and black will get mated very, very soon here. For example, if g6, trying to play king g7 and rook h8, trying to fight for the h-file and defend h7 and h8, doesn't work. White has this very, very nice move, and the best move in the position, bishop g8, which forces now the king either to g8 or g7, when if the king takes here, then after queen h4 he will get mated on h7 or h8. There's nothing black can do here. If he makes room on f7, he gets mated on h7. If he moves the rook, then he gets mated on h8. Nothing to do here. And the point of bishop g8 is that if now the king goes to g7 and tries to take here with the rook and then go to h8, well, there's not enough time. There's queen h4 again, and there's no rook h8. The bishop is in the way. And if now the king takes, then mate again on h8. If the rook takes, then black gets mated on h6. So after h4, instead of taking this bishop, Leela just continued the development with bishop b7. And now we have knight e5. Logical move. This knight loves to be centralized to the e5 square. But now this leaves g2 undefended. Can Leela take that pawn? Well, let's see. If the bishop takes here, then Leela can play rook g1. And if now the bishop goes back, then white gets this semi-open h-file. And his attack is even faster now, and black is doomed. For example, bishop takes here, immediately threatening to take on g7, and g6 doesn't work because of knight takes on g6. And if the pawn takes, then there's rook g6 check, and after king f7, rook g7 check, king e8, and now bishop g6, and black has no moves. It has to give up the rook, and shortly after that the game. So this doesn't work. Black can try, instead of g6, maybe the smarter looking knight e8, guarding g7 with the knight, but this doesn't work either, because now white can sacrifice all its pieces on g7 and then give a check with the queen and then another check, and now that the king is back on the g-file, castle long and rook g1 will just finish the job here for white. If the king tries to go to f6 and hide, then he gets mated on g5, and if rook h8, then queen f7 check and mate on g6. So this is not good. Taking on g2, not the best. There is one more variation here. If after rook g1, black takes on g5 instead of removing the bishop from g2, well, white can just take here, and again long castles, rook to g1, and crash through on the g-file will be the end of the game. So Leela, of course, didn't take this pawn on g2. He played rook e8 instead. And now came rook h3. Leela is continuing to build the attack here. Of course, bishop takes on g2 runs now into rook g3 with the same consequences. So in order to do something, Leela had to get active, and he played here c5, counterattacking in the center, but unfortunately for him, this is just too slow. It's too late, because now Leela can take on h6, and after g takes on h6 and queen e3, she has ideas like queen takes on h6, rook g3 check, and mate on g7. So c5 is just a break that came too late. For example, c takes on d4, runs into rook g3 check, and after king f8, knight g6 check is very strong here, not allowing the king to e7 and forcing him back to the g-file in the firing line of this rook. And the point is that if now f takes on g6, then queen takes on h6 with check, and black gets mated in 2. If he goes to e7, then he gets mated in 1 in g7 on g7, and if it goes to g8, then it gets mated like this. So c takes on d4, just too slow. So Leela had to come up with something else, and he decided to run with the king to e7. But now came check, and after king e7, queen g7, attacking f7, and at this point Leela thought that he tolerated this knight on e5 long enough. It's time to take him out, and after pawn takes on e5, he played knight d7. And at this point Leela didn't want these heavy pieces to come to the king side, and gave this check on g5, forcing the king back to the first rank in front of the heavy pieces. And now she played queen f4 to avoid the queen exchange, and after queen c7 she played rook e3 to defend this pawn. And now her idea is to advance this pawn, and black really has to work hard to stop that pawn. Leela played here c4, which gives up a pawn, but it gains the c5 square for some pieces, and it also allows this bishop to go to d5 and maybe get active on this diagonal if Leela avoids the bishop exchange, which she did with bishop e2. Leela didn't want to take here because then the e file opens up. So now that the e file remained closed, Laser played rook d8, moved the rook to the open d file. And now we have h5. And how do you stop this pawn? Laser tried here king e7, and again trying to get here with the rooks, but we have queen g5 check, forcing the king back. h6, and there's nothing better than knight f8, trying to guard h7, but after queen g7, it becomes clear that this knight will have to give himself up because there's no way to stop the h-pawn. We now have a6, and after h7, knight takes, queen takes, the queen went to e7 in order to dodge checks coming from this side of the board, especially with the rook on d1. This could be dangerous. Rook d1, not castling because Leela estimates that this king is much safer in the center than it would be on the queen side. So we have rook d1. And now the bishop takes the pawn on a2. And after queen h8 check and queen f8, Leela decides to go into an endgame with an advantage of 2 pawns, which is completely winning. And she took the rook on d8. And after rook takes, took the queen. And now she took the pawn on a6. And she's 2 pawns up, which should be enough to win. And after rook a8 and bishop back, Laser played bishop d5, attacking g2. And after f3, the smoke has cleared, and Leela has majority on both sides of the board. If the rook tries to harass these pawns like this from the second rank, then Leela has rook e2 defending everything. So Laser tried here something else, bishop c6, and now after rook e2 we have king e7, and both kings tried to come to the center of the board, b5, king e3, rook a7, and now after rook d2 and rook a4, Leela decided to block the b pawn on a lie square, allowing her bishop to attack it and forcing Laser's bishop to defend it. It's always a good situation to be in, where you can immobilize one of your opponent's pieces like this. Laser continued with rook a3, Leela defended the pawn, rook a8, g4, and Leela just advances with her pawns, and eventually black's position will have to collapse. Rook a1, bishop e2, bishop d7, and now king d4. And this king wants to get to the b5 pawn and take it out. So the rook went back to a8 to be ready to check this king away from the b pawn. We now have rook c1, bishop e8, and now f4. Leela is advancing with her pawns, just gaining space. Bishop d7, king e3, rook a2, g5, king f8, bishop d3, king e7, bishop e4, bishop e8, and now rook c2. Going for a rook exchange, which of course would allow her king to get safely to c5 and then just take out that pawn with simple moves like bishop d3. But of course Laser didn't exchange the rooks. And now after bishop d3 and king d8 we have rook h2. Leela goes to the king side now and tries to keep the black king on the king side far away from the b5 pawn. We now have king e7, king d4, and now since again the king is ready to come here, we have rook a8 ready to give checks. Rook h7, rook d8 check, king back, king f8, and now rook h1, and this rook is now going back to the queen side to a5 to attack this pawn. And after bishop e8, king d2, bishop c6, we have now finally rook a6 attacking this bishop and asking some important questions. Does this bishop want to stay on this diagonal and defend the b5 pawn or do something else? Well, Laser decided that bishop d5 is the best square for that bishop. But now after rook d6, Leela is threatening to play f5. And this pawn is overloaded. And if f5 comes, then f6 can be played, placing this king into a mating net. and that would make everything much more easier for white. So Laser played here bishop g2, which prevents f5, but now came g6, trying to break up these pawns, and there's nothing to do here. After bishop f3, Leela took on g7, king takes, and now we have king e3, asking the bishop again what he wants to do. Well, at this point the bishop doesn't really have options, because it can go back now to c6. On b7 it drops the b5 pawn, and on a8 is not very useful, and of course it can go to d5, because then f5 is again very strong. So Laser decided to defend the e6 pawn from g4, but now we have rook c6 with a very simple idea, rook c5, and picking up this pawn. Nothing to do. Rook b7, rook c5, and now after bishop d1, instead of this winning rook takes on b5 or bishop takes on b5, Leela played bishop e4, complicating things a bit. And now after rook b6, we have rook c7 check, king f8, and now king d4. She wants to get to c5 with the king and maybe take this pawn with the king. But after rook a6 and rook c8 check, king f7 and king c5, Laser played rook a1, and instead of again taking that pawn and making everything much easier, Leela played here rook c7 check, and after king f8, bishop c6. Maybe she wants to take this pawn now with the bishop, and after rook c1, she actually takes the pawn and gives up the c3 square, which of course is still winning, but makes everything so much harder. There's no need to give up that pawn. So anyway, Laser didn't take the pawn actually. She played bishop b3, and now we have king b6, rook g1, c4, and those pawns are just quite simply advancing now, and it's very hard to stop them. After a few more moves, here after king h5, Leela actually decides to create another passed pawn with f5, and Laser has nothing better than to take, and now the e6 pawn advances. You know, two pawns, maybe two connected passed pawns defended by the king and the whole white army, maybe would be a situation that Laser could cope with, but with three passed pawns now, this is surely just too much for Laser to handle. He played here king g5, and now after e7, bishop h5 and rook d8, Laser didn't try to stop this pawn from promoting. He just played f4, and now we have a new queen. The bishop has to leave the board. Rook takes, and now after rook h1 we have b5. Here comes Bernie. Bernie wants to be a new queen. Rook h6 check, king a5, and after a lot of shuffling, eventually Bernie will get to b7, and helped by the c pawn, and will get closer to becoming a queen. Here we go. And at this position, before queening Bernie, we have a couple of more moves here, shuffling, and here now Leela wants to give up her rook in order to get into a winning six-man table-based position, but Laser avoids that, and after some more moves, eventually Leela is also trying to give up her bishop to also get into a winning table-based position, but Laser avoids, and here we have a new queen finally, and Leela keeps offering the bishop, but Laser refuses to take it, and after a couple of more moves, eventually Laser will take the bishop, but before that we have c7, complete demoralization of the black army. A new queen on the board here. Well, we actually have a bishop, which is this must hurt Laser. All this strolling surely hurts Laser very much, and here now finally Leela gives up the rook, and eventually she will give up the bishop in order to get into this very, very difficult endgame where, you know, queen versus rook is hard to win, for humans at least, but for engines this is very easy. This is easier than saying hello, actually. And here now, after the rook and the king has been separated, this check now wins down the rook. And shortly after that, the game will end. Here we go. Mate on a6. This was a very quick attack in the French on the king side. After queen e2 here in this position and h6. Most GMs played bishop h4, maintaining the pin. Nobody tried here h4, which is surprising because it looks so dangerous. White will just castle queenside or don't castle at all, and this rook is in a very nice position for the attack. Please subscribe, like and share, and check out some of the other games. Thanks for watching and see you soon. Bye bye.